We are lucky as Druids, being able to shift into travel form in the Moor. But what about our poor rolls? Well, that's where this video comes in. Hey folks, and welcome to my guide for the twisting corridors in Torghast. We're going to look at how you can take your Resto Druid solo all the way up the floors and layers. We'll be covering how to give yourself the best chance to get that all-important mount, what Anima Powers to take, and what strategies for turning your meat healing into an unstoppable-ish damage machine. Let's get started. Before we get into the run itself, let's talk about what Twisting Corridors is. In this mode, you on paper have to do 3 wings of Torghast in a row. Each wing set in a traditional set of 6 floors, 2 floors, a rest floor with a broker, 2 more floors, and finally a boss on the 6th floor. Unlike traditional wings, the wings of the Twisting Corridors have some unique aspects. Firstly, you can have the same wing multiple times. In fact, you could have the same wing 3 times in a row. Secondly, rather than earning Soul Ash when you defeat the boss of a wing, you instead get to choose a guaranteed epic Anima Power, except the last wing of course. Just like regular wings, from layer 3 onwards each wing will have the same rising debuff, that starts higher depending on your layer, and increases as you go up the floors, except for the rest floors on floors 3, 9 and 15. These debuffs exist even once you leave the wing in question, however will no longer continue to rise, unless you repeat that wing. More so, the wings on 7 and 13 will apply their debuffs, but regardless of your layer, as they always begin on stack 1. Twisting Corridors is a long slog, so the first thing to look at is which wings you want. Never be afraid to reset a run because the first wing was bad. There are some very bad wings, because you are going to be stuck with it for over an hour only to fail at the end. While you have no choice in the second and third wings, the first you can keep restarting until you find the one you want. Torghast has 6 wings. Most of them are fairly okay on their mobs, but I do need to talk about Mortrugar. These enemies in this wing are awful, with dangerous melee swings, respawning elites, the mobs that blink to you. Perhaps what makes this wing the worst is its platforms. It's the only wing with these platforms, but with half of the valid patterns you'll end up pulling mobs instantly upon landing with no chance to plan your strategies or kite. Combined with its magic damage dealt debuff, this is a terrible wing that you will want to avoid at all costs. The remaining wings are only really bad because of their debuffs. Cold Heart Intercitia has a stacking health increase. If you get this early on, you'll increase the time you spend in this run by like 10 minutes or so. It's really not worth it. Health makes everything more dangerous and just wastes your time. Upper Reaches is the final wing you'll want to avoid first, as it will increase the physical damage you take. That leads to 3 good wings to begin with. While not ideal, as a Resto Druid the Soul Forges has constant damage on you. The thing about this is once you pass floor 3 you can reduce this damage by 65% for the rest of the run. Assuming you don't go overboard on health powers, as the damage is health based, before you get this power you'll have no issues. The last 2 are effectively the same, Stroder's Hall and Fractured Chambers. These have mobs with rising health that can spawn when you are out of combat. It is perfectly possible, however, to never see these mobs spawn, so this debuff will do nothing, most importantly on the final bosses. So with your first chamber pit, what about the prep work? What talents do you want? What soulbinds? The highest DPS makes sense as the best soulbind. For the Night Fae, which most Resto Druids are, Nia will be what you'll want to go for. For talents, most of them can be what you want, but I would recommend Cenarian Ward as it is the most time efficient healing. Feral Affinity to begin with, as its single target power is stronger than Balance, and that's before some Anima Powers. Mass Entanglement as a powerful CC option we'll cover later, and Germination so you can double rejuvenation yourself. Heart of the Wild on paper may seem like it makes the most sense, but often in the earlier floors you don't need the damage. Mass Roots is an amazing CC option. In fact, you can take Anima Powers to have it deal damage, meaning that you can root an entire pack and watch the non-elites in the pack just die. It is the ultimate safety, and besides, the aim is, with this strategy, you'll get Heart of the Wild from Anima Powers. So let's move on to those. The main plan of the powers is to build a strategy to beat the final boss. To that end, we want to transition from Feral Affinity to a kiting strategy, and for that we need the powers. The permanent Heart of the Wild That's an epic one. And a rare that increases your jumps. Once you get the Heart of the Wild power, remember that you always get an epic at the end of floor 6 and 12, you can change specs to balance affinity. Heart greatly benefits Owl more, and it makes Star Surge instant and all your dots stronger. This lets you start kiting to reduce the damage you'll take, and the increased jumps will allow you to cast instants while outrunning almost every enemy you'll face. These two powers are key and when offered should be taken. After that there are some useful powers that will greatly help but not required. The first are an epic pair, one to increase your damage by 50% but slow you, the second to cast an ability when you shift form. The latter is Starfall in Moonkin and Barkskin in humanoid form, both amazing instant abilities to get for free. The former may slow you, but your powered up jumps are actually unaffected by this, allowing you to just keep on jumping, or you can just shift and remove it. Two final specific powers before we touch on general goals, the first being the Obscuring Mists. These prevent you from being targeted while outside the circle. While this does not affect every caster in the run, it does mean that many must instead have chased after you, allowing you to kite them. Here I even use it to avoid the stun on the final boss. The second is the stacking damage dealt on your roots, a common one while they're active. As mentioned earlier, mass roots with this power will let your roots kill entire packs without you ever having to attack them. With those specifics done, we'll want to focus on two areas with our most remaining powers. The first is health. You are going to take damage, and without the health or damage reduction, you will die. Health, both from the usual means or the more at buff one, is one area, but you cannot also increase the duration of Barkskin or have Iron Bark proc from your heals to keep those uptimes high. Percentage based heals such as the Leech also work nicely once your health pool is large. The next area is damage, specifically dots and procs. Moonfire, Sunfire and eventually instant cast Star Surge will be your main single target damage dealing, so we want faster dot speed. Increase the damage on these spells, and proc damage as those are powerful for healing. The thing about procs with healing is that they don't care what spec you are, so they are going to deal the same amount of damage, which means for us, where our mobs have lower health that we need to attack, they're great. They also don't require us to keep on hard casting in order to trigger. Be sure to also grab the full moon one while you're at it. Buffs to Convoke are also useful. Early on you can take buffs to Rake and Rip, as these are common and they will help keep your cat going until you have the Heart of the Wild power that needs you to transition into Moonkin form. Besides those, you generally don't need movement speed, so grab other stats. If it's early on, grab some Phantom Gathering buffs, but these lose power as the run goes on. You can end a run with too much Phantasm, but one early on will help. Other powers to avoid, the Tranquility and Clear Casting ones are pointless, as is the Growl one, and don't take anything to reduce your health or damage. Remember, you are going to be using Arcane, Nature and Physical spell tools. Also, don't take the Immunity for 90 seconds one, we're going to get to that. Next we're going to look at Phantasm. Obviously, most of it you'll spend on powers or orbs, but let's go through some important usage. First, the potion to increase your damage. If you see this, buy it, but don't use it until you've engaged the final boss. Secondly, the Ravenous Anima cells. Most of the powers you get from them are fairly weak and not worth the hefty price tag, but one of them is a must and two others I think are worth it. The first is reduced fire damage. If you start with the Soul Forges, buy one on floor 3 and use it on a fire elemental or a caster. Otherwise be sure to buy a Ravenous Anima cell on floor 6 in case you have the Soul Forges 2nd or 3rd. Remember, always have one handy when transitioning to floor 7 and 13 in case you get the Soul Forges. Other useful targets are the ghosts in Mortrigar, allowing you to ignore the pools, helpful for kiting, or skeletons in other various wings, which will grant a skeleton pet who can put in some damage while you kite. Thirdly, we have the normal anima cells. With Venari's upgrades you could buy a lot over a run, but you should not use them. Buy them, but don't use them. Why? Because of the immunity. This power is very useful on the last boss, and by the time you reach floor 17 you'll have pretty much most of the good stuff. From this point on, if you see the immunity, don't select it as an option. Just don't select any option. What you do is you just ignore new powers and you just finish the floor, keeping this one in the bank as it were. Then, once you get to floor 18, you buy up everything, you pick the immunity power, and you quickly use up all the anima cells you've acquired. If you don't have the immunity on floor 18, you just use plenty of anima cells you stockpiled, and hopefully you find it. This may deny your power earlier in the run, but the last boss is the hardest part. You shouldn't need them for the rest of the run. If you end up with spare Phantasm, usually because of an early percentage increase to Phantasm or 2, Venaria will have an item that you can use to convert them into a buff. It's not much, but it's better than having some left over at the end of the run. Now that the powers and Phantasm use are sorted, let's look at the run itself. As stated, we're going to start as Feral Affinity. This has better single target damage, does not suffer from pushback, and can abuse early common anima powers that increase your dot power. For the first half of the floors, as long as you can pull carefully, you won't take too much damage from being in melee. Once you gain the permanent Heart of the Wild, it's time to shift to Balance Affinity. Now you can only change talents on floors 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 and 18. On the boss floors you can only change before you pull the boss, as the Broker's rested area will fade once you pull and it does not respawn afterwards. If on floor 12 you have not found it before you pull the boss, I would recommend you change to Balance Affinity anyway. The final 6 floors will be painful, and you will be much more vulnerable as a cat to getting killed in melee. Remember, as a Boonkin you also have bonus armor. You want to generally try and kill everything and loot everything. You only need to clear each layer once. You may as well make sure that you give yourself the best chance. While pulling elites after starting floors, remember to try and avoid pulling them with anything else. Elites are generally found either alone, in front of some kneeling non-elites, or surrounded by non-elites facing another elite. With the kneeling non-elites, you can use mass roots to keep everything else controlled, just don't use Sunfire until you're sure it won't cleave onto them. When there's another elite, try to clear out the surrounding non-elites, and maybe they'll not be linked. If you have to pull both elites at the same time, root the melee one and kill the other. Torghast mobs can reset if they are taken too far, except bosses, so you can reset the rising stats on elites this way if you have the space. Otherwise, use cooldowns. Remember, even a Feral Affinity Resto Druid can kite a mob. And Sunfire and Moonfire, they're powerful spells. The last 2 issues are on mob combat and Mortrigar. For mob-on-mob combat, avoid AoE and try rooting the entire group. The roots on the NPCs who are not actually taking damage from the other mobs will stay active. So what you should then do is target these mobs first, as they will easily swap threat to you. The other enemies would require some effort to swap to you and can be left for later. For the islands of Mortrigar, if you find some islands are just too full, use stealth. Even if they can see through stealth, just try and get off the islands as quickly as possible. These rooms are awful, and the mobs can be reset if you're quick enough. You may die getting used to it, but the win is terrible and the pools are bad enough that skipping them can be the only viable option. With that, that is the best tips I can give. If you are looking for more Torghast content, I have a layer 8 base completed with under item level 100, and a whole list of speedruns. For other Torghast info, check out my guide from beta, even if it's somewhat outdated. Thanks for watching, good luck with your runs, and enjoy the mount on your ults.